Welcome to the Middle of Culture. I'm one of your hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other host, Peter.
Hey, Peter. We are both feeling kind of low energy today. So
we are.
And maybe that's not a thing I should put into the world, but too late. I already did.
You know what? I think it's okay. It's okay for people to have low energy days and to still do the things that we need or want to do, even if it's with a little less energy.
I'm with you. I think that's a very good point. Anyway, what you been up to? Anything fun you've been engaging with the last couple of weeks? It's been Christmas and New Year since we chatted last.
It has. I'm honestly trying to think through. I've done a lot of music listening, kind of compiling my favorite albums of 2022. Narrowed it down to 25. I could be more brutal and make it a smaller list, but it was interesting. Out of those 25, 10 of those albums were either death metal or kind of death metal adjacent, whether it was death doom or something like that. But I thought that was, for me at least, a surprising amount of death metal in my favorite music of the last year. And I've been reflecting a little bit on what that means about 2022. And I think that it might mean that in some ways 2022 was a bit of a crap fest.
I mean, I think that was fair for a lot of us. For the listeners who maybe aren't huge metal fans, could you situate death metal in the larger metal milieu for listeners? Like, why is it surprising to you that there was so much death metal this last year?
Well, I do enjoy death metal, but it would be one of the more recent types of metal that I have taken a liking to. I previously was much more in kind of I like progressive metal a lot. That used to be my favorite. I like thrash metal a lot. I mean, I would say that if I were to list my top 5 favorite metal subgenres, it would probably... Death metal, I don't think normally would be in the top 5. It would be close, but it would be either just outside the top 5 or number 5. And with other genres, again, like thrash, progressive, post-metal, doom metal, I don't know what else. But again, that's where, death metal maybe comes in at 5, or maybe it's just out of the top. So it was just surprising to me that, nearly half of my favorite albums were death metal or death metal related. And for those who don't really understand death metal, I saw a very funny, well, I don't know how funny it was, but I thought it was actually a surprisingly informative way to categorize some of the different submetal genres. And I'll try and do this off the top of my head. I'm not going to try and dive into Instagram and see if I can find it because it's been a bit, but I think I remember it for the most part. And it kind of described the submetal genres as thus: heavy metal, there's a beast. Doom metal, you preach about the beast. Black metal, you obey the beast. Thrash metal, you're going to effing kill the beast. Power metal, you're going to fight the beast. Viking metal, you're going to fight the beast for Odin. Nu metal, you're afraid of the beast. Glam metal, you're too drunk to know there's a beast. And then death metal, you are the beast.
Okay.
So, like I say, I thought that was an interesting way to put it. And I kind of read that and I was like, yeah, that actually kind of works. And so again, it would just be unusual for me to have so many albums that resonated with me this year that were as brutal, or this past year, that were as brutal as they are. And I mean, we're talking some brutal stuff. We're talking some immolation, some psychroptic, some septic flesh, some, just a fair bit of pretty heavy death metal in there that, again, normally I would listen to, but I would listen to a little more sparingly. But for some reason this last year, it just really seemed to tickle my fancy.
Interesting.
But, other than that, not a whole lot. Finally did start reading again because, and I thought I would announce this here, I did finally finish my NaNoWriMo book on December 31st.
Yay!
I finally wrote the end of it. It came in at, right now it's around 61,000 words or so. I'm going to definitely go back and rework it and edit it and fix a lot of the issues that I know that are in it that kind of developed as I was writing, because I know there's some inconsistencies and some places where I need to enrich the backstory a little bit. But it felt good to get it done. Felt good to wrap it up and put a bow on it and move on from that. So, well, how about you though? Well, anything interesting you've been checking out lately?
Well, I have regrettably become Star Wars pilled again. I was off for a few years. I think we've talked about it here, but Rise of Skywalker broke me so badly that I was out. I was completely out of Star Wars altogether. And then Andor Ding Dang pulled me right back on in. My partner and I, have been watching Andor together because she has not seen it. And I had been raving about it. And so we decided to watch one episode a night in between Christmas and Reyes Magos, which is tomorrow from when we're recording. And so that is what we did. On Christmas we watched Rogue One, and then we've watched one episode every day since. We watched the penultimate episode today. And it's just a really good show. Even on rewatch, I'm like, this is just as strong, if not stronger, than I thought it was the first time through.
Nice.
And so I've just been dabbling in a lot of Star Wars media because of it. On my lunch breaks, I've started watching an episode of the show Rebels.
Okay.
Because that is also kind of that interbellum period of a show. It takes place literally at the exact same time as Andor, 5 years before the Battle of Yavin. And I had never really seen it. I had heard that the first season was kind of shaky, but seasons 2 through 4 were really good. But I decided to just dive in, and I am really enjoying it, to be perfectly honest. I think that the crew of The Ghost is a very fun, it's clearly a child's show. Like, it is for kids. This is not like Andor, where this is designed for adults. This is a kid's show. And it shows in the way that it is animated, in the way that things play out. Obviously, they're shorter episodes. They're tight 22s because they were on Cartoon Network or whatever. But I'm surprised, even in the first few episodes of the first season, how adroitly it is weaving the concept of rebellion and family and sticking up for what you think is right into this kids show. And frankly, the Ghost crew does a whole hell of a lot of murders for the heroic protagonists of our kids TV show. They are literally murdering stormtroopers left, right, and center all the time in nearly every episode. And that's cool. But it was different when it happened in Clone Wars, because most of the time your audience, insert Ahsoka, was killing droids. And while I think that droids are people in the Star Wars universe, I understand that does not seem to be the consensus for whatever reason among both fans and creators of Star Wars media. Droids seem to be seen as less than, rather than sentient, sapient people, which is what they are. Let's be perfectly honest. These are people. But the show treats it differently when someone kills a droid than when someone kills a flesh and blood being in the show Clone Wars. But in Rebels, those are just people. They might not have faces because they're behind stormtrooper masks, but dog, those are just folks. And your 15-year-old protagonist has murked quite a few of them in these first 6 episodes. But I'm enjoying it. I think like I said, I really like the crew, like the main characters. I think that it's a really fun kind of found family. I think their ship is very cool. The Ghost is a cool design for a ship. It's not as kind of outlandish maybe as the Millennium Falcon. It's a little more... Its geometry makes more sense, is what I'll say, than the Millennium Falcon. But I think that it is a very cool ship all the same. I think it's a very, very cool ship. And again, I really like the crew. One of the droid that's on the crew is an all-timer. He is such a little shit. You think R2-D2 is a rambunctious troublemaker. You ain't seen shit till you've seen Chopper. Chopper is so much more of a dick than R2-D2 could ever dream of being. And that works. It works for him. Nice. But yeah, so I've been watching Rebels, and then I also, during the holidays, the Epic Game Store was doing daily giveaway of games, and one of the games they gave away was Star Wars Squadrons. So I convinced I already owned it I'm a sucker like you, so I just buy things when they're on sale, and whether I've engaged with them or not.
Sure.
But I've played Squadrons before. I had it on my PS4 for a long time, and I played it. And it's also on Game Pass, so I can play it on my PC and play it on. I can live that bougie life because I've got it on Game Pass.
Mm-hmm.
But my brothers-in-law don't have Game Pass. They don't have Xboxes. So I was like, hey, you guys should download this so that we can, do some multiplayer Squadrons together. We can run some missions. So I've been playing Squadrons in preparation to hopefully, this weekend do some multiplayer with my brothers-in-law. And then just earlier today, I restarted, I guess I started last night, Jedi Fallen Order. Did you ever play Jedi Fallen Order?
I did. I played that on, I want to say I played it on the Xbox.
Yeah, I played it originally on my PS4, but it also is on Game Pass, and I prefer the Xbox controller, so I'm replaying it on the Xbox now.
Nice. In
preparation for the sequel coming out next month, I think.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think... I had forgotten how much I liked it until I booted it up and started it up again, and I was like, Cal Kestis is a great protagonist, and BD-1, again, all-timer droid. The Disney era is really knocking it out of the park when it comes to droids. You got Chopper, you got BD-1, you got B2 Emo. I mean, you got BB-8, you still got R2-D2 running around. So like, it's droid o'clock every day in my heart. You know, I love robots, and I love Star Wars robots more than any other type of robot. So, it has been fun to be running around with BD-1 again, hanging on off my back. He just reminds me of my dog Jack, who likes to sit in my chair as my lumbar support, leaning against my back all day. And so I guess I've just become Jedi pilled again. I'm into nice. Star Wars again.
Well, there you go. Sometimes it's nice to have a good reason to come back to something that, maybe you didn't spend quite as much time with in the last little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, Star Wars is like my first fandom. It was the first property that I remember truly loving.
Yeah, me too.
And so it's... And I understood when I felt like it wasn't for me anymore. And I was willing to let it go. I'm not one of those people who's like, they need to cater to me. Star Wars is primarily for kids and teens, and that's okay. And I'm not one of those anymore, and that's okay if it doesn't cater to me. But then they sometimes do cater to you when they put out a show like Andor, and that is laser focused at the 38-year-old disaffected exennial former Star Wars fan. So I guess I'm 39. Oh my God, I'm 39.
Yeah.
Anyway, we don't need to talk about the inexorable passage of time. That's happening to all of us.
That is happening to all of us, and it will. We started this saying we had low energy. If we start going down that path, the energy is just going to continue to just disappear.
It's true. So let's get excited. Let's talk about something exciting. This week, I wanted to talk, it was based on some comments that you've made as we've chatted the last few months. What I really wanted to talk about is tabletop RPGs. And so I have some, ideas of things I want to talk about, but basically I wanted to, and it seems very apropos of some things that have leaked out just earlier today regarding some choices that are being made by the owners of Dungeons and Dragons So it seems like a relevant time to talk a little bit about tabletop RPGs and our experiences with them, if we like them, why we like them, and what sorts of things we're into like that. So I guess my first question, Peter, is what is your experience with tabletop RPGs?
It is rather limited, to be honest. If I go back to the many years ago as a youth, I was always interested in Dungeons and Dragons, and that was the one back in the 80s that, everybody kind of knew. That was the one that people talked about, and that was the one that, at least in northern Utah, where we grew up in the Mormon subculture community, somebody decided that it was of the devil, that it was satanic back in the 80s, and so it kind of had that.
That wasn't just Utah. The satanic panic was a very real thing nationwide.
Well, that's good to know that it wasn't just isolated to Utards, of which, I probably had to count myself, at least back there at the time. But it was, I had some of those, and I think we've mentioned this before, some of the TSR, which was the company before they became Wizards of the Coast. They had some kind of choose your own adventure style books. And I enjoyed those. And then there was a book that, for the life of me, I wish I could remember what it was called. But it was sort of a single-player tabletop RPG type game where it was kind of a mix of a choose-your-own-adventure book, but you had a character sheet with statistics, and you were tracking your hit points and things like that. And I loved the heck out of that thing. I thought it was super cool. At one point, I got, I think that it's called Hero Quest. It was kind of a modular, it was somewhere between a true tabletop RPG and a, kind of a board game. You had a board, but for each different encounter, you'd set the board up differently. People, the players came up with characters who progressed from scenario to scenario, and someone acted as the game master and was running the NPCs and things like that. So again, in kind of my teenage years, played the crap out of that with some friends. And then I went to college, and then I went to med school, and then I did residency. And then I started working as a physician, and I just didn't have time and didn't really, I'll be honest, I didn't connect with people well enough because of my severe social anxiety that I had anyone who I felt like I could have even tried to engage in tabletop role-playing games with. So, that honestly brings us up to end of 2021, start of 2022. And kind of give the short story. And that really was, my wife has a friend who's really big into Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. He wanted to convince her that it would be fun. She remains unconvinced, but she gave it a real good college try. So she created a character, and then he's like, well, we got to have at least one other person. So then my 13-year-old, 12-year-old at the time, he creates a character, and the two of them are trying to run the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and they're getting their butts kicked because there's only two of them, right? So I kind of said, well, I guess this is as good a reason as any to try and figure this out. And so I, got the player's handbook and started, building a character and kind of started doing that and played a session or two with them. But again, it just wasn't really something that my wife was into. And so somehow I mentioned it in passing or something at work. And one of the guys in the OR said to me something about how he'd always wanted to give tabletop role-playing games a try, in particular Dungeons and Dragons. Again, I think just because of its the way it sort of worked itself into the social consciousness. People know about that one more.
It's ubiquity, yeah.
Yeah, and so we ended up talking to a couple other people there in the operating room, and I went to one of the other guys and I said, "Hey, look, I understand you've been playing D&D since like first edition." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I've been playing since the 70s." And I said, "Would you be at all interested in taking a bunch of us who've either never played or have only played very little a long time ago in the past and kind of, being our DM?" And he very graciously agreed and said he'd be happy to do that for us. And that was probably end of February, early March of 2021. And this group of us, there's
21 or 22.
Sorry, beginning of 22. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so, for almost a year now, this group of us, there's 6 of us in total, including the DM. We've been getting together almost every week, and I've been playing some Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice. So
that's kind of where I'm at, and there's more a little bit in there that we'll talk about going forward. But that's, again, it was always one of those things that I was tangentially interested in, but didn't ever really have either the time or in some cases the guts to really try and find someone or a group of other people who are interested in it. And I probably, to be fair, there's been a podcast that I listen to, Total Party Kill, where they, play Dungeons and Dragons together. And there's a bunch of those kind of podcasts. And this is one that I just happened to, it was easy for me to get into because I listen to many of the people who are on this. They're on other podcasts that I listen to. So there was that kind of that parasociality with that group of people that made it easier to get into that. And listening to them play it and kind of, that I think was probably what helped me the most, at least get some concept of the mechanics, and made it a lot easier to start playing it myself. But what about you? I think you've had a little more broad experience with tabletop RPGs than me.
A bit. My formative experiences are very similar to yours as well, because I would read those Endless Quest books that you had, or Wizards, Warriors, and You, which was, kind of bridged. We had Endless Quest that was basically just D&D versions of Choose Your Own Adventure, and you had Wizards, Warriors, and You, which made you pick, do you want to play the wizard or the warrior? And you would have to pick, if you were the wizard, which spells did you want to bring? And that would affect what choices you could make in the book. Or if you were being the warrior, which weapons did you want to bring? And that would affect your choices in the book. And then, we also had at least one of the Super Endless Quest books, which were those, or they changed their name to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Adventure books later on. That was the one where you had to keep track of your hit points, and you would actually roll dice and all that sort of stuff. And so, I engaged with those when I was a young kid. Played Hero Quest, which your copy of Hero Quest happens to be in my basement right now, I believe.
That makes me so happy to know that it still exists somewhere, because I have thought of it on and off many times over the years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in my basement right now. I think I grabbed it when I was home visiting the parents, either right before or right after my wedding. So I'm fairly certain it's in my basement right now.
Nice.
And so, played the hell out of that up to it came with that booklet that had 14 pre-prepared adventures in it. And then we went and made photocopies so that we could create our own versions of the map and our own stories to go with it. And that really was kind of the genesis of when you're making that is 2 steps away from being a dungeon master right there, baby.
Yeah.
And then obviously, as I grew up, same sort of thing as you, and it kind of fell out of the popular consciousness. D&D in the late 90s, early 2000s was not a thing people were playing around their table. They were playing Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment or Icewind Dale. And so that was where I started to re-engage with, the ideas of D&D, because those babies, those programs are rolling the dice for you. And you can even turn on a thing so you can see exactly what dice rolls you're getting, because those games are just playing D&D but digitally. And then, shortly after we got married, we had some friends who wanted to start a D&D group. And so Cassie and I both decided to go. I think very similar to your fine wife, my dear spouse was not interested after a couple of sessions. She was like, this is not for me. Part of the problem is that we started on D&D 4th edition.
Okay.
Do you know much about the differences between the different editions of D&D? Have you looked into this at all as you've gotten more into D&D?
I have not. The one thing I am aware of is that the guy who is DMing for us said that he continued to play 2nd edition until about 2 or 3 years after 5th edition had been released. And that was when he finally decided that was a new edition worth moving to. So he was not impressed enough with 3rd and 4th edition that he did anything really with those. I don't know why, but I did think that was an interesting thing he mentioned to me.
Sure, they're very different from one another. One of the things that I went and did in preparation for this is I just took a picture of my shelf of RPG books, because they're like hidden on a low shelf, because I haven't had a reason to engage with them in the last couple of years, because unlike you, I have not started a D&D group during the pandemic. But so I went and I took a picture of all of the books that I have, and I've read most of them, even if I haven't played them. I have I have some 1st edition books. I have some 3rd edition, some 3.5, some 4, and some 5. And you can see the big changes that happened between each of those. 2nd edition is really very similar to 1st edition. It just cleaned up some of the rules. But 4th edition is the real outlier, because 4th edition was made when Warhammer and Warhammer 40K started to get really popular.
Okay.
And so what happened was the designers were like, what if we went back to the war game roots that were the pre-D&D books, or the pre-D&D things that Gygax and his collaborators were making, because D&D is born out of wargaming. What if we go back and make it more wargame-esque? And simply put, 4th edition, I have a lot of fondness for it because we played it, and it was my first introduction to D&D. But 4th edition asks the question, what if every job was a wizard? in that, let's say you want to be a fighter in 4th edition. You open up your player's handbook, you open up to the fighter, and it says, here are your 4 level 1 skills. You have 2 at-will skills, 1 encounter skill, and 1 daily skill. And you're like, don't I just swing my damn sword? And
right?
D&D 4 says, no, you don't. You have to pick one of these 2 ways to swing your sword, and then you have to do the specific things that the spell essentially says for just swing sword. And that is how every single class in 4th edition plays. So it would require you to focus so much on positionality. You could not play it without miniatures and a grid. You simply can't play 4th edition without a grid. And
interesting.
5th, it's fine. It's fine. You just fudge it. Just make it up. It's fine. You don't need minis. You don't need maps.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have maps. We have minis and we have a map, but there are a lot of times when we're playing where we just kind of ignore that, and it is all theater of the mind.
Exactly. You can't do that with 4. You have to have it out. You have to be able to measure exactly how many squares from you to the next person. So it's really grognardy and messy in that way. So by the time you got to level 10 or 12, I had these cards that I had made for my warlord that were all of the different at-will attacks, the different encounter attacks, the different daily attacks, and it would take 1,000 years for anyone to take a turn, because you'd have to flip through 25 cards to figure out which damn attack you wanted to do. Whereas, If you play as a fighter in 5th edition, it's like, would you like to hit things with your weapon? And the higher in levels you go, all that means is, how many more times do you get to swing your weapon on your turn?
Exactly.
Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Like, yeah, it is not, I don't have to like say, well, I'm doing this kind of attack and then this kind of attack and then this. No, I'm swinging my damn sword. It's just a question of, do I get to swing it 3 times or do I get to swing it 2 times? And so it's really complicated because every single person has to have the mindset of a wizard. And I firmly believe it takes a very particular type of person to play a magic caster in a RPG. And if you're not that kind of person, then you're not going to be into D&D 4th edition. But that was what I started with, was 4th edition. And I had a fair amount of fun. Eventually, the person who was DMing for us wanted to play instead of DM, so I took over as the DM of that group for a while. And basically, any time I've had to play since, I've been a DM. Because that's what happens. You GM once, and then people are like, now you're GMing for life, sucker.
Yeah, that's too bad.
It's okay. It's kind of fun to GM. I like GMing. But then, since then, I have, read a lot of different types of RPGs, different rule sets, different ways that RPGs work together, and have played a fair amount of them. For my brother-in-law's bachelor party before he got married a few years ago, what he wanted to do was play D&D with all of his friends, but many of them had never played D&D before, so I was like, D&D's a little too much for people who've never played an RPG before, because there's like 7 different types of dice, and you have to know exactly which type of dice to do for which dumb thing. We'll get there. I don't like the D20 system, but
as someone who's still pretty new to this, but gosh, we've probably played at least 45 times in the last year.
You're not too new then.
We miss a week. But it took, and again, this is me coming from having played Planescape Torment and Icewind Dale and Baldur's Gate. So I'd had that computer RPG experience based off, I think those were all based off the 2.5 edition rules.
They're all running AD&D too.
But it took, I would say, at least 4 or 5 sessions before it really felt like it was starting to, I wasn't having to think about every little thing I was doing every single time. So yeah, it would be tough to have an enjoyable one shot if everybody wasn't already familiar with the mechanics of D&D.
Yeah, for sure. Which is why instead I decided to use Dungeon World, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Have you heard of the Powered by the Apocalypse system at all?
I believe you have mentioned this in passing, but that Probably. Would be my only experience with it.
Yeah, so it is a system that originates in the game Apocalypse World, which is basically a post-apocalyptic kind of Fallout-y setting for an RPG game. But it has a very simple 2d6 system where you just roll 2 normal 6-sided dice. So one of the things that's nice about it is you can play it with the dice that you stole from your copy of Monopoly. You don't have to hunt down D20s and D10s and a percentage die and a D8 and a D4 for my magic missiles and a D12, for my warrior's axe, and no, you just need 2d6s and you roll them. You add any modifiers based on skills that you have or things that are harming you and making you go down a number or up a number, whatever. And basically, if you roll a 6 or below, you failed. If you roll a 7, 8, or 9, you succeed, but there are consequences. So it's a partial success. And if you roll a 10 or better, then it's a full success. Very straightforward system. Yeah. Extremely simple. So basically, I just reached out to all the people beforehand and said, what kind of class do you want to play? And I will put together a character sheet for you. All you will need to come in is supply a name, a look, tell us who this person is kind of like, but I will prepare everything for you beforehand so you're ready to hit the ground running. And it was one of the most fun tabletop experiences I've ever had.
That's awesome.
because it was a really eclectic mix of people between my brothers-in-law and some friends of theirs, and then some family friends who are like, it's different when they're friends of the family versus like someone I met at college who I'm really good friends with now. So it was a really interesting mix of people. But we had a really good time, and that is still one of the best experiences I've ever had doing RP. And then a couple of weeks after that, we actually, with my in-laws, went on a big family trip for my father-in-law's 60th, was his 60th? I think it was his 60th birthday, which just coincided with being 2 weeks after the wedding because, Mormons, once they decide to get married, they're like, we need to get married in the next 4 months because that's what you do when you're young and celibate. So one does what one must when you're young and celibate. So, that had been thrown together quick before this thing that had already been planned. But then one of the things that my family-in-law wanted to do while we were out there is they wanted to have an afternoon where we all played an RPG together. So I actually ran them through a session of The Sprawl, which is a cyberpunk powered by the Apocalypse game. And so we had, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law and all my brothers and sisters-in-law play this cyberpunk one-shot that I had put together. And it was also really fun. And since then, I have just gotten really interested in other types of games that are not D20 systems or just are not quite so systems heavy. Because, D&D is a very systems heavy game. And nearly everything you do, if you have a really stickler, and it sounds like your DM is not like this, but if you have a really stickler DM, nearly everything you do, they'll be like, oh, well, you need to do this check, or you need to do that check, or you need to do the other check. And it's like, I think my character could just climb this shit. I don't think I need to roll the stupid die to figure out whether or not I could climb a ladder. Like, I think it's okay. And so I'm far more interested when it comes to tabletop in games that are like that, where you don't need... Does it make sense to the DM or to the GM that you want to climb a ladder? Yeah, then you just climb a ladder. You don't have to roll dice to see if you climbed a ladder.
I will say I'm going to chime in now because you got me thinking about it, and it's very much, I think, germane to what you're talking about now. But that really is, what is the mindset of everyone who is participating? And that's the big question, I think, that is, for me, the key. And I have been incredibly fortunate that in my limited experience, the guy who's our GM, he looks at this as, this is collaborative storytelling. This is something we're doing to have fun together. It is, is he going to challenge us? Yes. Is he going to make us, give us some puzzles, make us think, make us work in certain situations? Of course. But never to the point where it feels like it's an antagonistic relationship. And that, I think, has been what has made it so enjoyable for myself and for all of the group, is not viewing this as it's me against you guys, but looking at it, hey, here's the story, here's the encounter, here's the thing that I want to share with you, because we're playing a campaign that he created himself.
Okay.
And, you can see him enjoying. There's been a couple different times where we had, these big long sessions, and at least twice we finished, and he was like, guys, that was the best session of D&D I've ever played in my life. And nice. It's so, that's what I think has made it such an integral part, really, of, it's the weeks that we can't do it. It's funny, because everybody in this group, we all work together in the operating room. There's myself, there's an anesthesiologist, there's 2 nurse anesthetists, and there's 2 OR nurses. So we see each other all the time. Sure. And because we're nerds, we're talking about what's going on all the time. And it's funny, last week we couldn't play. And so, I was working with one of the nurses, and I was like, man, I'm really bummed we're not going to be able to play this week. And it's, for us, I think it's really been because of the way that our DM has approached this, and it hasn't ever felt like, he's out to get us. And I think that makes a huge difference. And when you start to get too systems heavy, it feels to me like you can start to use the rules and the systems as a weapon.
Yeah.
And that's just not nearly as fun for me. And I'm sure there are some people who find that really gratifying. But, that's not for me. I mean, I'm going to tell you this funny story because I thought it was great. We're fighting this, basically it was a form of a Hydra that to prevent it from regenerating 2 heads every time we killed one of them, you had to have hit it that turn with radiant damage. That was the particular, kind of what you needed to do to eventually defeat this thing for real. And we didn't have a lot of characters in the party who can do radiant damage regularly. We've got 1 paladin and 1 cleric, but everybody else pretty much doesn't have a lot of radiant damage. But then we remembered that we had all stocked up on some holy water, that we could throw our water flasks at this, and then some holy oil. And so our barbarian's getting up there, and he's toe-to-toe with this thing as a barbarian berserker a dwarf barbarian is going to be, right? And I turned to our DM and I said, hold on, what if? Because, and again, he's being pretty flexible. One of the guys was like, well, can I apply the holy oil and still make an attack, or is that my turn? And he said, well, normally you'd have a multi-attack, so I'll let you apply the holy oil and then take one of your attacks in that turn. So, because he's like, that makes sense to me. And so our dwarf was going to apply the holy oil to his axe, and then he was going to get one of his 2 attacks. And I was like, wait a second. What if he takes out the flask of holy oil, throws it up in the air in front of him, and then two-handed takes his battle axe, swings, smashes the flask, thus getting the holy oil on his axe, but also splashing it on the creature. And then he takes his second attack. Can he get to do 2 times radiant damage to the monster? And our dungeon master kind of thinks about it for a second. He looks at me and he just goes, dude, that's awesome. Do it.
Yeah, man.
And so, again, that's where it's been really fun, because when we've come up with ideas like that are maybe a little bit outside, but it's a cool thing, he's totally down for it. And so I have appreciated his skills as a DM to roll with those kind of punches. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's ideal. That's great that you have that collaborative experience. I'm with you. Like, I know there are people who, and there are GMs who are like, it is me versus the players.
Yeah.
That sounds like the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen. I have literally no interest in that whatsoever. That sounds, I like, it sounds like your GM, this is a collaborative storytelling experience. We're trying to make something and all have a good time. And
Very
me
much.
being an antagonistic dick is not going to make for a very fun time for you. As far as I'm concerned. I'm sure there are people that like it. I think they're weird. That's all I have to say about it.
Nope. I'm 100% with you.
So you tell me about this character that you play with your with your group. What's the group dynamics like? And who's your character, and why did you choose to play that character?
Well, so we all, it's an interesting group. There are a few of us who are running multiple characters for reasons. Long and short of it was, there were some additional people who started with us, and after 1 or 2 sessions kind of realized maybe it wasn't for them. And by leaving the group, left us with a few gaps. At the very beginning, we had only 1 caster, and that caster was a frickin' warlock. We didn't have anybody else who was really magic. So I started playing a paladin, because I thought that, fighter's kind of always what I generally go with on RPGs at first, but I was like, well, I want a fighter that does have a little bit of spells and maybe some healing, but is a little tanky. So that was the character that I started out with, is that, she's a human paladin, and she's fun. but she's not nearly as fun as my second character that I ended up rolling. And that was when we were like, well, we need a caster. And I kind of, because our DM said to us, once the person who was a wizard, once that person left the group after a couple sessions, he kind of said to us, he said, look, you guys really got to have more than just a warlock from a spell standpoint. Because we had a dwarf barbarian, we had a tabaxi rogue, we have an elf ranger, we have a half-orc warlock, then we had my human paladin, and then the DM is kind of playing a human cleric to add to the group that he doesn't do a lot with, but mostly uses it to break out prayers of healing and stuff like that to help us all out. And so when our wizard left, I decided, I said, sure, I'll try and run 2 characters. And so I created a half-elf sorcerer, and it was a lot of fun because one of the other things that our GM really likes is he wants you to have a backstory for your character. He wants your character to have motivations, to have reasons for what they do. So I ended up having a lot of fun creating this wild magic half-elf sorcerer with this backstory of a druid who made promises that he couldn't fulfill that led to her being exposed to powers from the elemental plane, and just kind of all this stuff that made her an interesting character to me. And she's a lot of fun to play because she's just this itty bitty little, I think I made her like 95 pounds, like 5 foot nothing. She's a glass cannon. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of hit points. She can get hurt real fast, but holy crap, she can deal out damage. We were playing a couple, it was probably a month or 2 ago now. And needless to say, long and short of it, and this won't mean a lot to some of the people who are listening, but to other people, I think they'll find this funny. Some shambling mounds. So these kind of plant tree-like monsters, big things. They attack us in a swamp. And my sorcerer has sorcery points that she can spend to do things. And one of the things she can do is, depending on the level of the spell, she can spend a number of sorcery points to twin the spell. And so for fun, I decided I was going to twin Firebolt. Now, Firebolt is a level 0 spell. It is a cantrip.
Yeah. It's not a
very high level spell.
By itself, that's like a D4, isn't it?
No, it's actually 2D10. So,
how does that hit so hard?
Well, she's, like I say, she's a glass cannon.
It sounds like.
But it's a level 0 spell for my sorcerer.
Dang.
So I throw my D20 and I get a 20. So I crit. Then I twin the spell. Then it turns out these creatures are vulnerable to fire. And so my 2D10 that I roll an 18, which doubled because of the crit, the natural 20 to 36. But then because they were vulnerable to fire, doubled again to 72. And then because I had twinned it in one level 0 spell, I did 144 points of fire damage.
Oh, that's that good stuff.
And we still talk about it in the group these 6 weeks later because it was so hilarious.
That's good stuff right there, man.
It was, so it's things like that make this character really fun. And then because she's a wild magic type sorcerer, if I do cast a spell that is not level 0, so level 1 or higher spell that has an attack roll associated with it, then I roll a d20, and if I get a 1, then I have to roll a percent die, and we go to the wild magic table. And it might be good and it might be bad. Sometimes I cast Magic Missile at level 5. Sometimes it's cast Fireball at level 4, centered on yourself. So, it's a high risk, high reward character to play, and I think that has been what has made it so much fun. The Paladin I do enjoy as well, but she's very much, she's got the highest ace armor class out of everybody in our group, and so she's the one who can get in there and take a lot of hits. But the sorcerer, the half-elf sorcerer, she is a ton of fun to play because it is very much kind of a high-risk, high-reward sort of character.
Sure. So when you're playing these two characters, do you play them both like simultaneously in the same session, or are you saying, well, in this session or this series of sessions, it makes more sense for character A to be there than character B?
Oh no, our entire group has been traveling across the vast face of this land together, and so I end up playing both of them in each session.
Wow.
So like I say, I figured
how does
after
that work for you?
It's at first it was overwhelming. But at this point I have been doing it long enough that I'm constantly thinking about both characters and in my head kind of queuing up, okay, here's what this one's going to do when it's their turn. And sometimes I'll even sort of pre-roll and make notes. Okay, if it gets to me and, everything hasn't changed and I'm still going to do this, I've got my numbers all ready to go and everything to kind of speed things up and move things along. There are a few times where I know that I end up paying more attention to one character than the other, depending on kind of what's going on and which of those two characters is going to be more useful. But it has not been bad. And again, the longer I've been doing it, it's gotten quite a bit easier to manage at this point.
That makes sense.
So it's fun, though. I mean, I get to take 2 turns when everybody else just gets 1 around. So.
I was going to say that, I don't know how well your 2 characters synergize with one another, but you could really set up some fun times if they do.
Our whole group is pretty good at working with each other. And so it's really, that's one of the most fun things is it creates lots of interesting scenarios for our different characters to kind of play off each other. We have this, we were fighting giants and look, it just involved a dwarf barbarian who was raging, running between the giant's legs as somebody else set their testicles on fire, and then the dwarf used the testicles as a punching bag. I mean, because they were the right height for the dwarf to just go at it. And, those are the kind of things that we get to set up, and it's often hilarity ensues.
Yeah, that was going to be my second question, or not my second, my next question. What is the tenor of the campaign? Is it more of a jocular air when you guys are playing, or is it a more serious sort of situation? It sounds like more jocular if you're setting balls on fire.
So again, this I think goes to the strength of our GM. The campaign itself could be considered very serious. I mean, it starts out, and for like the first couple months of game time, we were slaves. Our entire group had been captured by orc slavers, and we'd been branded, and we were in a slave camp. And so it's been this long quest of us tracking down the other slaves, trying to free them. And so from a subject matter standpoint, it's fairly serious. But as a group, we all know each other very well because we've all worked with each other for, some of these people I have worked with the entire 10 years I have been here. And
so these are people you know well.
Yeah, we know each other really, really well. And again, we see each other multiple times a week. The rest of them, they see each other almost every single day, but I'm in the OR 3 days a week. So, I'm seeing them a lot. And I think because of that relationship we have with each other, where we're already really good friends, we hang out together after, in this situation. One of the guys is one of the guys that I've gone to a bunch of concerts with and stuff. So we just have a lot of fun, and it's really interesting. And I think this is what kind of is the biggest thing for me, where I have found this to be such a positive aspect in my life. The game is fun. The game's just a lot of fun. That's great. But for me, more than anything, it has been this opportunity to make friends, because I'm very friendly with a lot of people, but I find it very, very difficult to make friends.
Sure.
If that makes any sense. And again, that gets back to kind of the social anxiety and stuff.
I think that's just true for adults. I think that when you're a kid, it's a lot easier to make friends, but especially when you're an adult, and especially when you're an adult in a long-term relationship, so you're not like out there trying to meet people to potentially date and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's hard as an adult to make friends.
Yeah, it really is.
I think that's just universal.
And this has been a really good way for the entire group to kind of have something to do where we're enjoying, we're having fun, we're laughing, we're having to think. We're oftentimes, again, we run into each other at work in between, and a lot of times I'm working with one of these people. They're my anesthetist or they're my OR nurse, so I'm working with them all day, and we're sitting there in surgeries and we're talking about, hey, what do you think we should do next time? Or what do we think we should do about this? And we're bouncing ideas off each other. And again, the game has facilitated us really developing stronger friendships and stronger relationships. And yeah, you're right. That's really difficult to do as adults sometimes. And so I have been incredibly grateful for the ability of the game to be the vehicle for us to have these, closer social relationships where where it's easier for us to hang out and not have it be about medicine.
Sure. Well, and it's just nice, if you like these people and you want to be around these people, it's nice that you can have that outlet that isn't just talking about work. Yeah. Because I have some friends from work who I'm very good friends with. And, when we get together outside of work, after a while I had to start instituting, a rule that was like, no, we're not talking work. No.
Yep.
No mas. I don't want to hear a single thing about a single, academic tech situation. Like I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of to wrap up here, it sounds like you've had a really good experience in this last year getting into tabletop RPGs.
I have.
And it sounds like it's primarily been D&D, which, cool. Like you said, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. But I guess my question is, do you have any interest in branching out of D&D and trying other systems or trying other types of games? Because I think for me, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to get out of D&D proper is I just don't like fantasy. We've talked about it here. I'm just not into fantasy.
Sure.
In the same way that I am into sci-fi or dystopia or cyberpunk or things like that, which I think, draws me away from an interest in Dungeons and Dragons as a game. But is there anything that you would want to try, or any types of games or settings or anything like that you would be interested in, exploring moving forward?
Absolutely. And and I actually think this for me has been a benefit to D&D being as systems heavy as it is, as you kind of mentioned, is it has made me much less hesitant to explore other options. I haven't really gotten into playing a bunch of them yet, but what I have done is gone down the rabbit hole of, look, listeners,
buying and reading.
And if you haven't heard of Humble Bundle, you need to know about Humble Bundle. And it started out as just a bunch of video games that you could pay a very little amount for, and you'd get a lot of video games, and they still do that. But they do a lot of books, and they do software, and they do other things. And I have bought inappropriate numbers of RPG books through Humble Bundle. I'll be honest, if they have a bundle where it's like $15 and get these, 12 books in the Pathfinder system or whatever, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to grab those so that I can look at them and I can understand these other systems, and then I can play them sometime. So I haven't yet, but again, I've definitely looked into it and started to kind of familiarize myself with those. There's a couple single player RPG systems that I've actually that I've purchased.
Hell yeah.
Where you just kind of sit down, and you've got the kind of like that book that I read years and years ago. But, so, and these, some of them are based off the 5th edition rules, and some of them are based off separate rule sets, their own rule sets. And so a lot of different places where this whole category of tabletop RPGs that not that many years ago seemed overwhelmingly, just kind of off-putting to me because of the complexity and such. Now that I've had this experience understanding better sort of some of the central tenets of a tabletop RPG, regardless of the system, it's made me much more willing and interested to kind of explore others and other settings. And so, I have some that, again, are quite a bit of sci-fi, and a lot of cyberpunk, some steampunk stuff. There are a number of people who, on like Patreon and stuff, create encounters and adventures and whole campaigns in their own settings, but using kind of 5th edition rules and adapting them in some cases to whether it's fantasy, but again, some steampunk, some cyberpunk, and even some sci-fi type settings. And so I'm pretty much at this point, I am interested enough that I'll give anything a look, and you would be interested in trying out almost anything now. And that's been a fun change to not find the concept itself intimidating.
Yeah. I think that's really apropos for you to bring up the, people who are creating their own campaigns and encounters and things built on the OGL, the Open Gaming License that is D&D 5th edition.
Yeah.
Because, as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, the updates to OGL leaked earlier today, or maybe it was an exclusive look to one person. It sure sounds like they're making all of the wrong choices. It sounds like Wizards is really screwing the pooch here.
My anesthesia provider today was RGM, and and he and I were kind of talking while I was doing surgery today, and I actually said that to him. I said, it really sounds to me like Wizards of the Coast has completely lost sight of the reason that Dungeons and Dragons is as popular as it is. In my opinion, now I say this as someone who doesn't have the years of really being familiar with this, but I look at it as an outsider, and I say the only reason Dungeons and Dragons has become so ubiquitous and so widely, if not necessarily played, but at least so many more people are familiar with it and are interested about Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing game, but particularly D&D. It is, in my opinion, entirely because of that Open Gaming License and the fact that, all these different podcasts and YouTube things have been able to pop up. And then the fact that there is so much good, interesting, and innovative in some ways content out there that you can just go and get fairly inexpensively. And again, so much of it that you can find really interesting things that you already know the rule set. You understand it. And so it's pretty easy to pick up and play. And by making that something that can no longer happen, man, they're shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, if they want people to just stay on 5th edition forever, great. Keep doing what you're doing, because, it seems so short-sighted. And just, again, like you said, they've completely missed the ball here. It just seems to show a complete lack of understanding of what has made Dungeons and Dragons such a behemoth. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I heard earlier this year, or I guess last year, sorry, kind of middle of last year, I heard something to the effect that Dungeons and Dragons provides Hasbro, who's, parent company of Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons provides Hasbro with 10 times the revenue of all of their other games and toys combined.
It wouldn't surprise me. I saw a thing just earlier today. Wizards brought in a Billy last year. $1 billion. Their next competitor, in terms of their entire portfolio, not just the games, Paizo, had 37 million last year.
It's not even close.
And a lot of that's board games, because Paizo is also a big board game publisher, especially in Europe.
Yeah.
But like a Billy versus 37 million, it's not even a question.
No, it's not.
And so it just seems so, and I think that you're right, where like, even if people aren't playing D&D, there is a critical mass of people who know about D&D because of hyper popular web series like Critical Role, which, I don't need to talk about why I don't like Critical Role, but I don't like Critical Role. Lots of people do. Or The Adventure Zone, or the one that you mentioned earlier, whose name I can't remember. There are a ton of podcasts out there where people play 5th edition D&D. So like even people who have never played it themselves are familiar with the system, are familiar with how it works, and know that like if I was going to play one, I would play D&D 5th edition, just like the McElroys do on The Adventure Zone.
Yeah.
But that's all going to change if they really crack down and really tighten this down and people stop doing it, especially because Pathfinder is right there.
Yep.
Pathfinder is just D&D 3.5, friends. That's literally what Pathfinder is. People who hated 4 went and made Pathfinder, which is D&D 3.5, which until 5 came out was regarded by old heads as like you were a 2-person, a 3.5 person, or a 5-person. Like those are your things. So the 2 people just stayed, like your GM just stayed with 2 forever. And the 3.5 people all went off and made Pathfinder. Yeah. And guess what? Pathfinder is having the time of their life on the internet today, going around and being like, hey, sure, we would love for you to make your stuff for Pathfinder. Let us send you free copies of how our system works. So like, it seems really foolhardy on Wizards' part. And I see why they're doing it, but I think that they should have thought further about it.
Well,
but ultimately,
maybe I'm being naively hopeful that somebody somewhere is going to listen to the criticism and it's going to click for someone, and the accountants will be overridden by people with sense who look at it and say, oh, this is going to actually hurt us a lot. All of this forward momentum we have, we're going to just completely stop that. But no, I'll be honest, like it made me go today, hey, you know what? I need to go buy some Pathfinder books.
I mean,
if for no other reason than I'm like, I want to support somebody who's not doing what I think is kind of a scummy thing to do.
I get that entirely. But what I'm hoping for, my goal as a little troll, as a little person who's just like from behind the scenes, I love it because I don't think D&D is a very fun system to play.
Sure.
And that's just me. That's just me with my experience with a lot of other systems, having read a lot of other systems, having played a lot of other systems. I like the collaborative storytelling part of doing a tabletop RPG and not the which dice do I need to pick to do which thing. So I am all in favor of people being radicalized by this moment and saying, well, what other systems can I play? Be that Pathfinder if you still want a D20 based system. Be that, a more traditional indie one like Dungeon World, which is very traditional style, or whether that's a weird thing, like play a Forged in the Dark game. Blades in the Dark is one of the coolest games I've ever played in my life, and it is so different than what you get out of an experience with D&D that it's one of those things that I just want, my friends who are really into D&D, or like you and your family, I just want to be like, yo, let's just hop on a Zoom call, let's play some Blades in the Dark. Maybe that will convince your spouse to be like, oh, maybe I do like RPGs, because that's what happened with my wife. We would play these other types of games and she'd be like, okay, I'm getting the vision now because I'm not so bogged down with like remembering what the rules are. I'm here to play this game and collaboratively tell this story. And sometimes I throw some dice on the table.
Yeah. No, I think if nothing else, I am grateful for the way that I see tabletop role-playing games in general really having a moment and kind of coming out of, the dark really that they were kind of relegated to for so long. I mean, when we were growing up, it was, look, if anybody didn't notice this, at the beginning of the movie E.T., they're playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of being billed as not negatively. I don't think Spielberg used it as hey, look at these losers playing this. But it's very much kind of been one of these things where it's you got to be a certain kind of nerd to get into this.
It was the purview of the outcasts.
Yeah. And it was really fascinating one day. We were talking about this, a couple of us again at work, and the nurse who was in my room, she's great. She's a very good nurse. She's the person who the second she walks into the lounge, she's going to turn on the TV to whatever trash reality TV. And she admits that she's just a horror for trash TV. She'll be the first one to tell you that. And this was bad on me. I made the judgment that I thought this particular nurse would be one of those people who would mock something like D&D. And we were talking about it, and she was listening, and she's got a 2-year-old son. And all of a sudden she stops and she goes, you know what? She goes, I really hope that my son, when he gets a little older, can find a group of people who want to get into something like this. She's like, this sounds so cool. And for her, it was the idea of, again, that a group of people getting together, solving problems, telling stories, and enjoying one another's company. And you can do that no matter the system. I mean, that's what I think this is bringing to light is, hey, there's ways that, look, board games are fun too, and card games are fun too, but this is a different way that people can get together and play games and be creative and just, have a good time in what I personally think is an incredibly productive and I'm just going to say it, uplifting way. I mean, I have been in the ways that I said at the beginning when we were talking about music, 2022 in a lot of ways was an absolute shit year for me. But one of the things that made 2022 okay was that I had this group of friends who I was getting together with on a regular basis, and we were having a good time doing this, playing this game. And in this case, it happened to be Dungeons and Dragons, but you could substitute any system in there.
Sure.
And we would have had the same, I think, pretty much the same experience, because for me, it is less about the mechanics and more about that experience of everybody at the table working together to explore a world and tell a story and discover things. And it's been great. And I hope that it does bring into light some of these other smaller systems and smaller things that, can get some notoriety and continue to do interesting stuff.
Yeah. And just to wrap up, I think that that's a perfect, a sentiment upon which to close. It's that's the goal here. We're trying to build this world and tell this story together and have a good time with our friends. And what better way to do it than in collaborative, creation and fun interactions and those sorts of things.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I guess we can close it there. And we thank you all for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the penultimate episode.
Yes, of our winter
of our X content. Yes, with Logan, the good one? Question mark. Hopefully, still.
I know.
Hopefully, it's
We're
as good as I remember it being. We'll see. For me, I still think that the first X-Men movie is the best one.
And I would not argue with that. I still think I might like X2 a little bit better, but the first one held up way better than I think it had any right to.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. So, we'll see you all back here in 2 weeks. As always, rate, review, kisses are on the line. And you can always drop us an email at feedback@themiddleofculture.com. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks.
Thanks again, everybody.